Now that we know a little bit about a few of the filters which we'll encounter in the blur gallery, here I want to dig deeper into working with the tilt shift blur, and in particular, I want to highlight how we can use the distortion slider and also how we can save out our selection as a channel mask so that we can then take advantage of that in order to modify the blur area of our photograph. I also want to work with tilt shift on this image because what you'll discover is that you'll use these blur filters a little bit differently when you're working on different types of photographs. All right, well this time, rather than applying the filter as a smart filter, what I want to do is copy the background layer. Press Command-J on a Mac or Control-J on Windows, and let's go ahead and name this new layer Blur. Next, we'll navigate to the Filter pull-down menu, here select Blur, and then choose Tilt Shift. When you click on the Tilt Shift menu button, it will launch this image in the blur gallery, and it will apply a default blur. Here, as I click and drag this around, one of the things that you'll notice is I can change the area of focus. Yet what I want you to focus in on, instead of looking at the area where the image is sharp, is look at the area where the image is blurry. Notice how it changes the shape of the items in that area. Let me zoom in closer so you can see this better. Watch as I click and drag this across the car and the trees and all of those items that are becoming a bit blurry. Well, you can change the characteristics of the blur with the distortion slider. Notice that as I change this slider or reduce the amount of distortion, you can see that we're actually changing what's happening to that part of our photograph. If I click and drag this up even more, and if you look at the car there, you can see how it's changing the way that we see that car. So in this way, you can customize that blur area and the distortion that you have there in order to suit your needs or your vision for how you want the image to look. All right, well next, I'm going to zoom back out. With this photograph, what I want to do is I want to have a blur effect where the car's in focus and where I also have this guy over here in focus. Well, to do that, I need to rotate the blur. We already know how to do that. Position your cursor near that solid circle and then click and drag to the right to rotate one way, drag to the left to rotate the other. All right, great. Well, so far so good. We now have this area in focus, the car, the guy crossing the street. Let's take a look at this without the overlay. Do you remember the shortcut to hide the overlay? It's the H key. Press and hold the H key. Now, if you press that key and if it doesn't work, here's why. What might have happened is you might have clicked into the field which allowed you to change the blur. Well, now if I press the H key, it's not going to work. Yet, if we simply click on this icon right here and then drag this around a little bit, that will deactivate any of those fields. Now when we press the H key, we'll see that overlay disappear. All right, next let's look at our preview. Here's before, and then here's after. Well, I like this. I think that the blur transition is too harsh. To make that transition area smoother, we increase the distance between the dotted line and the solid line. Then, of course, we need to click and drag this around in order to change that area of focus. And I want to do the same thing down here. I'm just going to click and drag these around in order to customize this a little bit. And I'm trying to create a blur which is a little bit softer, not quite so harsh. In other words, I want it to be softer from the area of focus to the area of blur. Next, I might lower the blur amount just a little bit more as well, and then click and drag to reposition this. All right, well here we're having a look which is looking pretty good. We're getting closer to what I have in mind for this photograph. And I'm just going to drag this around a little bit more, press the H key to turn the visibility of the overlay off, click on the preview checkbox, there's before, and then there's after. All right, well, after having customized the area that I've selected, in this case, this area, to remain sharp, what I want to do is save that out as a channel mask. You can do so by clicking on this icon, which we have up here in the options bar. So go ahead and click on Save Mask to Channels, and then click OK. What that will allow us to do is to apply the blur effect to this layer, and then in the channels, you'll notice that we now have this mask. If you turn on this icon, you'll discover that this is showing us the mask or the selected area. If you Command or Control click this mask, it will turn this into a selection. So here what I have, we'll turn off the visibility there to see that, what I have selected is the top of the image and the lower area. In the same way that Quick Mask works, you can see that this area is the area which won't be affected. And that makes sense, right? Because our blur is affected up in this part of the image. Now, why might that be helpful? Well, this can be incredibly helpful for this reason. When we navigate back to the Layers panel, what we can do is we can actually apply an effect to this area of our photograph, and sometimes this can be helpful to make the blur look a little bit more realistic. In order to apply this technique, what we'll do is copy this layer once again. Here I'll click and drag this to the new layer icon. I'm going to go ahead and name this layer Noise. Now before we add the noise, I'll click on the Add Layer Mask icon. Here, let's turn off the visibility of the other layers so that we can see what we have. On this top layer, we have a layer which has blur, yet we also have a mask which is masking out the center area of the image. So now we could apply another filter just to the area which is blurry. And here, in order to be able to do that, what we did was we went to the Channels mask, we Command-clicked on the mask, went back to the Layers channel, duplicated the layer, and added the layer mask. All right, well now here with this layer, let's target it by clicking into the layer. You'll see the brackets show up around the little icon for that layer. Then I'll navigate to my Filter pull-down menu. Here I'll choose Noise and then Add Noise. In this case, we can see that the noise is just showing up in the upper and lower area of the image. We might want to decrease the noise perhaps a little bit. What I want to do is just make this look a little bit more like film grain, so I have a really low noise amount which is affecting this part of the image. Next, click OK in order to apply that. Now currently, again, this layer, it has blur and a bit of noise, and it has this nice transition area. Now sometimes what you'll want to do is you'll want to apply a little bit of the noise grain to the other areas as well to try to make a bit more of a uniform look to the grain that we're adding here. Well, in order to do that, double-click the mask and this will open up the mask panel. Here, if you decrease the density of the mask, this will allow some of that noise to show through in this area of the image. This becomes evident if I turn off the visibility of the other layers. Notice that as I decrease the density, we see more and more of this part of the photograph. In this way, we can bring in some of that noise to this area as well so that we have a bit more of a uniform effect. Yet we still have a stronger amount of noise being applied to the upper area of the picture. Now, why might you want to apply noise when you're using tilt shift? Well, tilt shift is traditionally used on certain type of cameras, say large format cameras, or maybe with the tilt shift lens. And sometimes it might be fun to try to create a bit of a nostalgic look when it comes to using this tilt shift filter. For example, you might want to try to simulate a little bit of a tilt shift look that was captured using a camera which uses film. Well, here we're able to do that, and we're able to bring in another filter on top of that here. Now, sometimes it's helpful to change the blending mode of this layer, say to soft light. This will increase the contrast, and here you can see we have more contrast, and it will blend that grain into the rest of the photograph. In other situations, you might just want to tap down your opacity a little bit here, just to blend that film grain into the overall image. And again, these adjustments are really subtle, yet nonetheless, it's helpful to see how you can save out that selection as a channel mask so that you can make some subtle adjustments to those areas which you've selected or to those areas where the blur is applied.